Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Subscribing to My Podcast. Because I have a new guest featured every week, it makes it very difficult to maintain consistent viewership. So if there's one thing that you can do to support me or the guest featured on the show, it's by interacting with my channel in every way that you can. You can always decide to unsubscribe later if you decide that you hate me or my show. With that plugging aside, enjoy my discussion with Riley Lester is the current president of Students Resisting Fascism, which is a relatively new club that has been started, and hopefully the name is indicative of what you imagine the club is about, but it's a political group who's trying to aspire change. I had an awesome conversation with Riley a couple days ago when we had met for the first time, and it seemed like he's an incredibly passionate person. He had actually sent me videos of him protesting and speaking at some rallies here in Iowa, so I thought all of that was very interesting, and I figured I have to get him on and then hear what he's got to say. But Riley, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and then tell some of the viewers some important things that they should know about you.
Yeah, my name's Riley Lester, like you said. I'm a student here at Iowa State. I actually study kinesiology, so it's a little bit different than what I'm currently involved with in my organization. But given the current state of our administration and in our country, I think it's time for everybody to kind of step out of their designated career fields and supposed societal roles and try to do something and be active when it comes to our political system. I think that's a big problem right now is a lot of people try to stay neutral or non-political because it's not their job. But, I think it's time for, especially all students right now, to stand up and be political in our daily basis. So, yeah, that's why I started this organization, really. But, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess tell me a little bit about like the club and yourself. What is your like political origin story? Like, Why did you start? Why do you continue? And then, broadly, why is it so bad that this club has started and now, you're doing all this work?
Yeah, so I grew up in rural Iowa, small town, pretty relatively racist town actually. So, in middle school, I kind of went down the alt-right pipeline like pretty much every single other kid in my school did. And it wasn't until maybe sophomore year of high school that I realized, hey, this is actually really bad. We shouldn't be speaking like this. We shouldn't be thinking like this, I actually started reading more books and trying to expand my knowledge on political subject matters. And I realized that we were kind of the target audience for the alt-right pipeline, the small rural town in Iowa. And so I started to gravitate a little bit away from that, choosing different friends and stuff. And when I got into college, I started to really think for myself about the subject matter. Reading books is a great thing. It's a very important thing. It expands your knowledge incredibly. So then I started to get into a little bit more of the left, slowly moving a little bit more to the left. And then when the Israel and Palestine conflict really took off a little bit over a year now, I started paying attention a lot into that, and that's what really started to motivate me to do something politically and take more of a stance and really expand my knowledge as much as I could. That's really what got me into this was the Palestinian genocide, and I thought it was really crazy that nobody was saying anything about it in Iowa or in any of the communities that I was in. It was just something that people were throwing underneath the rug. So that's what really got me into this. And then I started doing some more studies, particularly about the environmental crisis. And that just like slingshotted me into the next level. I'm like, oh crap, we need to do something now because, we can get into it a little bit more later. But the environmental crisis is something that affects the entire world. The planet's going to live on, but humans can't survive the way that we are right now.
Yeah, well, I think what's important to qualify before most conversations like this is it seems that some people really need justification for why you would be so emotionally involved or just have so much energy into politics. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of people who especially are uninvolved, but especially in the older generation, they're like, this generation is too soft. They cry about politics all the time. They do these things. And it seems like there might be a willing sacrifice of your life to get this involved in politics. People like, politics is not that serious. Like, I don't know why you're getting so involved. Like, you know, stuff like that. I guess, how do you combat that sort of sentiment, or how can you kind of launch this conversation from a perspective that justifies your kind of involvement in this?
I mean, are you human? Do you live in society? If you answer yes, then politics affects you. You know, whether you want to believe it or not, whether you want to pay attention to it or not, politics will affect you no matter what. You know, it's a broad societal thing. Politics is not something that you necessarily see on a day-to-day basis, but it's something that you see on an institutionalized level. And it affects literally everybody that lives in the society. You don't need qualifications to be into politics. That's not even how our Constitution was founded. Our Constitution was founded on the principle of citizens governing themselves, you know? The House of Representatives, you know, it's supposed to be citizens from districts around that represent the people. I think career politicians has really skewed our view of what politics is supposed to be. You know, you have senators that get reelected, and nobody comes in and stops them or votes against them. And people are just like, well, that's the senator, you know, that's his job. It's not my job to care about that. But it's constitutionally our job to care about it. We're supposed to be the ones that are making the decisions, and the representatives are supposed to be representing us. So if you are a person that lives in society, whether it's America or any other country, then you should care about politics because politics cares about you.
Yeah, I think, I guess it seems like the most pressing issue for you right now is going to be the environment and how that affects. I guess, what are some of the most, what's rattling around in your brain right now when you think about the environment as, you know, pressing issues?
Oh, well, it's extremely pressing. I mean, first of all, we've already surpassed the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that was the previous Paris Climate Accords agreement to stay under. They agreed to stay under this 1.5 level, and we've already surpassed it. The 1.5 level is significant because passing it leads to extreme natural disasters, droughts, floods, natural disasters like hurricanes and tornadoes at a more frequent level. And not to mention that Trump just a few days ago signed an insane amount of executive orders that has been getting rid of environmental protection regulations. He signed 3 orders that were boosting the coal mining production in America. Coal is probably the worst fossil fuel in terms of carbon emissions. So we're already past the level. We're already kind of past the point of no return when it comes to getting carbon out of the air. In terms of in 10 to 15 years, we face a mass famine because of natural disasters due to climate emergency. We've already surpassed a level that we were supposed to stay under, and Trump is now signing more executive orders to boost fossil fuel emissions. On top of that, if you focus more on a local level, specifically here in Iowa, the environmental crisis has a lot to do with our agriculture, and a lot of people don't put those together. For one, glyphosate, which is a chemical that is used in our pesticides that we spray on our fields, has been linked to 80% of bees dying in America over the past 12 months. 80% of bees in America, the ABA just reported a couple weeks ago that 80% of bees in America have died over the past 12 months, which is insane. And that's likely due to glyphosate. Glyphosate has also been linked to higher cancer rates. Specifically here in Iowa, we have the second highest cancer rate out of any state because of our agricultural industry. That glyphosate gets sprayed on our crops and the runoff goes into our water. So it's an environmental crisis. Has to do with our agriculture and has to do with our food production. The big thing about the earth heating up is that it'll cause a loss of crop yields. Microplastics do. I haven't even gotten to that, but that also affects our crop yields. There's been numerous studies recently published about how microplastics are inhibiting photosynthesis in crops, causing a reduction in crop yields by up to 22%, I think it was. I'm not sure the exact number there, but it's very significant figures when it comes to the photosynthesis reduction. Microplastics are produced through fossil fuels. So we are boosting the fossil fuels, we are boosting our microplastics, and that is inhibiting our crop yields. The crop yields are already going to suffer and already have suffered because of climate change. The more we heat up, the faster the feedback loops will come into play, and the more serious all of these things will start to compound onto each other.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I know that one of the chief responses, and I wonder if you have thoughts on this, is that a lot of conservatives will say that we account for such a small percentage of the CO2 emissions in the world. So they report that a lot of this is because of volcanic activity, or maybe because of our fields with animals, some sort of like fecal matter.
The
There's a lot
methane.
of there's a lot of jokes about this.
Right.
And then beyond that, it is not maybe even the United States emissions. It might be other countries, particularly third world countries, that they blame for a lot of these emissions in the world. I don't know if you have more up-to-date facts on this, but this is kind of the accusation that I hear a lot, where it's like even if we reduced the amount of CO2 that we were emitting, it would have such a small influence on our global CO2 emissions.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just not true. I mean, it's an actual scientific fact that humans are accelerating the climate crisis insanely exponentially. And if you talk about specifically American production, I don't know exactly the percentage of what we account for. It's a decently high percent, but we are still increasing our emissions while other countries are dialing back on them significantly, specifically in the European Union and China, who happens to be the biggest carbon emitter. They are significantly reducing their carbon emissions, and America isn't, If you go look at third world countries, for instance, a lot of that comes down to global colonization. America historically uses Africa to have as many of these plants that they don't want in America. It's environmental racism is what it is. We colonize the country and we put all of our factories in there as much as we can. One, for cheap labor, and two, because we don't have to see what it does. But if you look at Africa specifically, it is heating up faster than most other places. America is heating up the slowest because of where it is on the globe. The where we at right now, March of this year was a 1.67 degrees Celsius increase from pre-industrial levels. That 1.6 isn't evenly distributed. Some areas are heating up at 4 degrees Celsius. Other areas, like around Greenland, are heating up at 8 degrees Celsius. Around Africa, Central Africa, is heating up at above 2 degrees Celsius, So at different areas, it's heating up, and it's not due to because they're necessarily producing the carbon, but it's due to the feedback loops that come in play. We produce carbon, and specifically around ice sheets, they melt faster because of the UV radiation to them. The more the ice caps melt, the faster they melt. They're feedback loops that come into play there.
Yeah, well, and I'm tracking a lot of these causes, and I wouldn't dare say it's not an issue. I'll reveal a little bit of my of my thoughts on it, I guess probably as the conversation goes on, but I don't know if that generally addresses the idea that humans aren't as responsible as we might think it is, or at least that America is as responsible. I guess is your response to that we are responsible by proxy because we've put plants in other places, and so now they can be responsible? America? Yeah, well, specifically in America. The idea is that if Americans were to be better, or if policy were to be better, that we could help global warming.
Right.
The contrary position is that we don't have much of an influence on it at all, that we account for such a small portion. And I guess I just wonder, I don't know if that was directly addressed.
We do.
Okay.
We do create a significant portion of it. But regardless, it's even if we did contribute such a small portion to it, it's still a portion that matters, Everybody needs to cut their carbon emissions now. It's not a matter of, well, we can just slowly minimize it and we're not doing that much, so it's not that bad. It's we need to stop now or else the planet's going to be uninhabitable for us. It's not even like a matter of how little one country is doing it or if they're doing it more than we are, so it doesn't matter. It's we as a globe need to kind of unite with this. That's what the Paris Climate Accords were for. And Donald Trump pulled us out of that twice. So specifically in America, we are contributing because we are not working with the rest of the world to do something about it.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think no matter how the statistics roll out, we should be doing our best to limit as much as we can. Mm-hmm. I do think, though, that the steel man for the conservative side would be something along the lines of, this is how the world is going to be whether we reduce our carbon emissions or not. So our next option should be finding ways to limit the Earth's natural carbon emission or something along those lines. That it's not actually our input. It maybe was or is, but our goal shouldn't be to limit our output. It should be to limit the output of the world. As in, even if we were there or not, this would be the similar position that the world would be in today.
Well, if you look at the paleoclimate data when it comes to that, that's just wrong, because the speed at which the Earth has heated up historically on the warming, because we go from ice age to heat age, type of thing. The rate at which the globe normally goes is significantly slower than what we've done. Like, if you look at the graphs, it's an exponential increase of total carbon emissions and heat. Like, it's very linear when it comes to carbon emissions and how much the Earth heats up. Not even just carbon, but methane too. I'm sorry, what was your other point on that?
No, I mean, I think that addresses it fairly well. I guess the idea would be that the Earth would be in a similar place as it is now. I do imagine too that this might. I'm sure you hear this often, that correlation doesn't equal causation, something along those lines. Like, just because the graph is going, it doesn't mean that it's an intentional decision.
Right.
Maybe things are more active just because there are this many people on the planet. You know what I mean? Like, it's something to do with breath, like literally something that we have to do. I don't think conservatives are necessarily making this argument, but I think it's important. I think that climate change is such a statistical truth. Like, it's either there or not.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's scary to me when you come on, or even and especially a conservative come on, and they say things like, the statistics backs me up. Both sides are saying the statistics back them up. There's a truth on whether or not that is. Is there a way you can kind of dig us out of this and clarify whose statistics are right and why? This is a very challenging question. I'd basically be asking you to solve the problem, right? But do you have any advice to get people to kind of dig their ways out of these statistics? Or
look at the climate scientists. There's one person I look at a lot is Peter Carter. He's one of the leading scientists and reviewers for the IPCC, which is like the International Climate Data Center. He's active on his Twitter, for instance, every day. He's posting constant stuff about like graphs and stuff like that. I think a lot of it just comes down to willful ignorance and ignoring the data, because there isn't data that supports that this is just natural. There isn't. It isn't. Because the paleoclimate data historically shows that we are increasing it at an exponential rate. Like, the data isn't there for the opposition. And even if you look at like all the popular data when it comes to the climate crisis now, a lot of it isn't even it isn't conservative, in the sense that it's taking the worst possible guess of what's happening. If you go on an elevator, it has a max weight limit on it, right? That max weight limit is significantly less than what the elevator can actually hold, right? So if someone doesn't get on it and say, oh, we're at 5,000 pounds, which is the capacity, we're probably fine, right? If it was actually the capacity at 5,000 pounds, then that would cause problems. But the actual capacity is at 7,000 pounds. When you look at climate, scientists really should be saying, we have to keep it under a certain level now, or else there's going to be catastrophic damages. And they should be over-exaggerating how bad it can be to make people stay underneath this level. But that's not what they're doing right now. They're underestimating how much it'll be. And this is something that Peter Carter talks about all the time. I'm a subscriber to the Climate Emergency Forum. It's a podcast with a bunch of climate scientists where they go on and talk about current issues. And it's such a big issue in the sense that we are taking the best possible outcome of climate change and saying that, well, let's hope that it won't be as bad as it actually could be, instead of taking the worst possible outcome out of it and saying, this is what could actually happen. We have to stop this from happening. And so in the sense of looking at the data and the science around it, it's the data out there is actually way worse than what is popularly produced.
Yeah, I think another conservative talking point would be something akin to, like, they've been saying this for 80 years, 100 years. Where's the problem?
Well, it has been already. That's the thing. Is people like it has been affecting our crop yields. The coral reefs are dying at such an extreme rate, And that plays back into another feedback loop because the corals are a carbon sink. You know, they soak up the carbon from the ocean. The more that dies, the less carbon gets soaked up, and the more it gets into our atmosphere and causes global warming. Same thing with the trees, with all the forest fires that are going on. You know, it's been linked to climate change. The heavier droughts, and there's been way more droughts. There's been way more floods. And when the forest fires happen and get rid of these mass growth forests, then there's less carbon sinks. So that carbon just goes into the air instead of feeding the trees. Especially with the logging that's happening right now in like the Amazon and all of these old growth trees, which are the biggest carbon sinks that we have. We're getting rid of those and it's just going out into the air now. Like the science is there and what's happening is happening. We haven't seen it at a local level here in Iowa yet because we're probably going to be close to the last ones to be severely affected by it. But sea levels are rising. And Iowa, for instance, faces like a mass dust bowl by 2040. If we pass the 2 degrees Celsius level, because of how bad our topsoil currently is, we're going to be so much more susceptible to extreme weather events destroying our crop yields and causing another dust bowl. This is how like the original dust bowl happened. And due to climate change, we are going to see another one of those. We've already seen the results of climate change.
Yeah. Well, and that makes a lot of sense to me, too. I feel like this stuff has been in our science textbooks for the last, like not only like predicting, but documenting the death of these things, of these parts of the world, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I wouldn't say I'm super skeptical of that. What I will say, though, is that I can imagine that people have made predictions like the prediction that you're making about the Dust Bowl in 2040. I imagine that we have passed predictive moments in our history, and I wonder if those things have actually happened. Like I can imagine somebody would respond to the clip of you saying that,
right.
And then them being like, well, they said that this was going to happen and it didn't happen.
Right.
This is going to happen and it didn't happen. This is going to happen and it didn't happen. I guess I wonder, like, do you have any? Can you foresee the TikTok comments right now of people who are pointing out these things and why that's not the case? Or
I understand that entirely, but why not be conservative about it? Like that's what I'm trying to say is why not prepare for what climate change, the worst of what climate change can bring to us? If we don't prepare for it, then it's just going to be a famine here. Because only 4% of the crops that we produce here in Iowa actually stay here in Iowa and get consumed. Most of it's used as crop feed, or most of it's shipped out. We don't have a local supply chain to feed enough people here in the Midwest. And so it's stupid to me to say, well, that hasn't happened, so why even worry about predicting it? Because that's not what science is. Science is about preventing horrible outcomes from happening. Yeah,
well, and that makes sense to me. And I've never understood, to me, there are certain issues that I can understand how they're kind of all or nothing. You know what I mean? Like, people wouldn't say that there's like a middle ground on abortion or about like human rights. But to me, it seems like there is a little bit of a middle ground with climate, it's so numerical. Like it's just this much money, I want $1 trillion, you want 0, let's meet in the middle somewhere. So that's why I really dislike when conservatives are just like, the alternative to some maybe crazy request for money, they just say no, 0, because it's not real. It's like, why would you ever take that risk? Like,
it's insane to me.
Give some money. Like, surely we can just.
It's taking like a risk for no reason.
Well, and that's why I try not to. And this is a very uneducated take, but I try not to take too much to maybe the emissions, because I just have to look at some graphs to see like what exactly are we responsible for. But there are totally serious issues unrelated to emissions that affect our climate, like you were talking about with the bees, like you were talking about with some of these other things, like especially with our pollutants and maybe some of our energy sources. Like those to me are a lot more tangible climate problems that I don't know why conservatives lump into this huge predictive issue. It's like, if we can save something, we should. Yeah,
I mean, we're currently seeing it in our water and in our food, and making the connection between climate change and environmentalism and the agriculture industry, I think is the most essential thing. Because like I said, the climate change is going to happen. Whether you want to believe it or not, it's going to. It doesn't matter arguing about it at this point. What matters is fixing our food distribution system and making sure that we don't all starve to death because of multi-breadbasket failure. You know, because a lot of our food is shipped in or shipped out. You know, global trade has created not self-sustainable communities, basically. You know, so if climate change happens and causes a mass flood in Asia, flooded rice field, and at the same time we get massive storms in the Midwest that wipes out our crops, then all of a sudden we have two food bread baskets that collapse at the same time, and somewhere is going to be destroyed because they're not going to get food from it.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder too. You had given an example about a chemical that was used in corn that is
glyphosate.
Glyphosate. What is the purpose of that? I'm instantly a little wary of examples like that because glyphosate had a purpose when it was created.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that purpose is being fulfilled, what you imagine the purpose is, and if it can counterbalance maybe some of the harms or externalities that it has.
Well, it's a pesticide. And you have to look at it from more of a systemic issue because of why we need that pesticide to be sprayed is because of how our current farming setups are. You know, we don't have, for instance, animals grazing our crop fields that would be natural deterrents to those pests. We don't have as many. We don't have as many actual animals that are natural deterrents to these pests because of our damage to the environment. We've already destroyed multiple species, but that's besides the point. The glyphosate is a pesticide used to stop pests on crops. The issue is that it also is very bad for us. You know, it gets into the air, it gets into our waterways, and it causes a higher cancer rate. Currently in Iowa, they just tried to pass a bill. I think it was SF 394, where they were going to try to give legal immunity to Bayer Corporation, which is the producer of the Roundup that has the glyphosate in it. Legal immunity from them being sued because of the glyphosate. That bill didn't get passed, but it's been in and out for the past 5 years or so now. So they're trying to make it easy on Bayer Corporation to go about doing this because that's how our current agricultural system is set up, and we need a full rework of how we do it here in Iowa.
Yeah, I do think that the macro argument for glyphosate is that we need to feed as many people as possible. Mm-hmm. Now, whether that's motivated by money, ideally money represents need, and food is a need. And so the idea is that you put these pesticides in to get the most food for the most people, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's a particularly nefarious cause to try to put a pesticide. Now, the idea is that if it's having negative externalities, we address that, something like that. So this kind of immunity, I'd be a little skeptical of, like as in I wouldn't want to grant this kind of immunity.
Right.
But if the numbers weren't too atrocious or it wasn't exactly linked to the bees, to the collapse of the bees, what I'm saying is that it's important. Yeah. It's important that we have it, and I feel as if you would agree with that.
To an extent. The issue when it comes to making these direct links is that it requires a ton of research and a ton of funding and a ton of time. You know, there has been research and it has been linked to the bee death. You know, it has been linked to the higher cancer rates. You know, Bayer Corporation presents their own independent studies to our legislators and say, we investigated ourselves and we didn't find that it causes higher cancer rates. That's what they did. That's what they've been doing for 5 years now. And other industries have been saying, no, it actually is causing higher cancer rates. We can't do this. So it's been a big legal battle between Bayer Corporation doing their own self-evaluations and other corporations trying to call them out for it. So that's the big thing when it comes to that.
Yeah, I wonder if like it had come out and it's very difficult to put a value on this stuff because you're starting to value human life against like a monetary thing. But yeah. Let's say the glyphosate allowed us to feed and essentially save the lives of 1,000 people, and then only 1 or 2 of them is suffering from cancer. There might be a number that you can equate that's right. Like but this chemical is worth it despite these externalities.
The number is that Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in Iowa, and it's primarily due to this. Like that's the leading theory behind it. And the incentive to me isn't they're trying to be glorious and feed all these people.
Yeah.
It's that their product is getting bought by everybody. You know, if they come out and somebody comes out and says that their product is causing cancer, then that hurts them financially. You know, that's what it really comes down to, is that everybody is buying the Roundup. Every farmer needs this stuff, because not only is it's kind of required. Farmers have to obey certain regulations, and these regulations are passed by our lawmakers, and those lawmakers are paid off by the Bayer Corporation. That's not like some speculation. It's sustainable proof that they do that. You know, public records are everywhere of the money that they receive. So Bayer Corporation has a part in determining what farmers are and aren't allowed to do. Due to our current industry of farming, the large-scale fields that they are, it's required for them to spray pesticides, because we can't pest in our crops. It's not, to me, I think the issue lies with, why is Bayer Corporation, the company that's making the Roundup, having such a big say in what the farmers are and aren't allowed to do? You know, farmers aren't even allowed to grab their own seeds and replant them, like, because they want to keep farmers from buying. They want the farmers to keep buying more seeds. You know, they aren't allowed to collect their own seeds. Like, that to me is insane.
Yeah, I think this I'm a little bit weary of. Would you think that, let's say Bayer wasn't involved in any of these lawmaking, do you think that any farm would not use pesticides? To me, it seems essential that you have a pesticide, and I can even see why you would regulate that you have to have a pesticide. Because if one farm is feeding all the bugs grow, and then the bugs are a problem for farms that have pesticides.
Right. Like I said earlier, the pesticide issue is a much more systemic issue of how our farming is currently set up. You know, it's whether or not we should be talking about specifically. I don't think the question is, should farmers be required to spray pesticides. I think the question is, should the farmers be required to farm in the way they are? You know, these farms are massive. They're large scale, owned by like one person. You know, we need smaller farms, individualized farms, and much more of them. So people have a system where they can create kind of a permaculture. That's the big thing, is if we created a permaculture environment, then the pests wouldn't be nearly as much of a problem as they are with our current farming setup.
Now, I'm not sure about this. This is getting into a little bit of my agriculture knowledge, but I do think, like, one, on the most macro argument, farms are of that scale to feed that kind of people. So, like, I think we both agree that agriculture is really important. You know what I mean? Like, we need to feed the people that we have. There's an efficiency argument for why we have it the way that we do. Even with the example of pesticides, if we were to have a bunch of small owners, little variances in even just things like pollinating technique, crop, like how much you water it, what you water with it, what chemicals you put in it. One person who's weaker on pesticides than another, pesticides and rodents and stuff are allowed to grow there and then start eating other people's farms. So it's like this uniform nature of these large-scale farms are, in the most ideal society, are intentionally created so that these things don't happen, so that weaker farms aren't able to create problems that stronger farms have to now deal with. And so that's why it's all owned by the same person and curated in the exact same way. Now, there is kind of an extremity of, like, now that one person owns all the farms, they're just, like, looking for more and more. You know what I mean? That's probably not good, and we should limit that. I don't know if I like the solution, though, of, like, having a bunch of different farmers in the same area. Does that kind of argument make sense? Like, I understand the problems associated with one farmer owing everything and then trying to save as much money as possible and to make as much money as possible. That's probably not great, but there are good reasons as to why farms are structured the way that they are.
I understand what you're saying when it comes to the reasons, but I don't think it's efficient. I think you said from an efficiency standpoint, it should be like this. I don't think it's from an efficiency standpoint that it should be like this at all. I think permaculture is much more efficient. I think having an entire acres of field with just corn is destroying and eroding our topsoil, which it has. Our topsoil is destroyed. Not to mention that, the Native Americans knew this. You know, they told us actually not to farm the way we are currently farming in the Midwest area, because the soil wasn't meant for it. That's why the Dust Bowl happened, was because of that. So in the sense of permaculture, this is getting a little bit more outside of my expertise too. But the sense of permaculture is creating micro environments with multiple different crops, trees, bushes, all this stuff that helps keep the soil together and helps stuff grow together. The Native Americans didn't have these mass lands full of crop. They planted their crops like around forests, around forestry, around shrubbery, around big trees and around other things. I think it is inefficient the way that we are currently doing it. But like I said, again, I'm not going to argue about exactly what our farming should be like, but it needs to change the way that it is currently doing it.
Yeah, this will be my last challenge against this point particularly, but I do think that even with that, if you just look at a giant cornfield and you see like the combine harvester that is dedicated to doing it, that is like this mass evisceration machine that just goes down and plows all the corn. You can't have other things in there. You know what I mean? It would just destroy it and wouldn't be able to harvest it.
Right.
Beyond that, so like imagine you would harvest one plot of corn and then you have to switch to a different machine to do one thing of beans. And, or even worse, within that cornfield, there's like plots of beans like surrounded there. Or if you did it around the trees, you have to like get that combine and like swerve around trees. Or even worse, you have people in there like trying to get it by hand. So the Native Americans were able to do it because they weren't feeding billions of people, would be the idea, right? They were feeding their people. Now, again, I'm not saying that what you're saying is like this isn't the all or nothing mentality. I agree with you on like specific things, but I do think that there is a designed purpose for the way fields are made. I do think that corruption is allowing us to use that as an excuse to have even worse farming techniques.
Right.
But if you were to strip it down, strip away all the corruption, I think the way it's done is good. I think you would just be diversifying employment, better regulations, better research for cancer and like externalities. You'd be doing stuff like that. I don't know if you would destroy the whole network of how farms are.
Like I said, it is to my understanding in my own research that the permaculture is way more effective, and the way that we are currently doing it isn't the most efficient. But the point is we do need to change it. It needs to be regulated better. It needs to be changed in a certain way that isn't and it goes back to the breadbasket failure. We have so much crop in one area that's meant to feed so many people, and that is so susceptible to causing a famine. If we have a Dust Bowl here, it's what's going to happen from that. That's what I'm talking about, is the climate change is going to cause the way we are currently set up to not work.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you on that. Yeah, I do agree that like it changes, and I'm a big advocate for change, period. Whether it's even like just trying to do better in every way that we can. I think is a noble cause and a worthy cause too. So I'm definitely on board with you on that. There was another issue we had talked about before this. It was climate change, and then there was another one that you've been thinking about. What was that other the other thing that's kind of been on your mind recently?
The healthcare industry?
Yes, the healthcare industry.
Right.
Talk to me about this. What do you think are some of the pressing issues with that?
Oh my goodness, there's so many pressures. It's a for-profit industry, That's the big thing, is health insurance is the leading profiter in America, which is insane to me. I think they profit around $5 billion per year, somewhere around there. And the fact that we don't have health care for a majority of our citizens, it's become a sense of, if you don't work, if you don't make enough money, then you don't deserve health. You don't deserve health care. And that's not how it is. In the system where we value capital more than people's lives, that's how this works. If you don't have money, then you don't deserve to live, essentially. And I don't understand how anybody sees that as righteous of any way, because it's not like this in pretty much any other country in the world. America has some of like the worst healthcare standards, and we don't have healthcare for all. We don't have healthcare for people that need it the most. In fact, people have to pay insurance premiums if they have medical conditions. My brother's diabetic. His insulin costs 5 cents to make, and he has to pay over $300 a month for it. You know, if he doesn't have insurance, if he gets laid off from his job for a month, he can't afford insulin to live. You know, there's actually I don't know the exact number anymore, but there's an insane amount of people that go to Tijuana in Mexico to get their insulin pens because it's so much cheaper. It's cheaper to get to Tijuana and get insulin than it is to just live where you are in America.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to think about and a lot to unpack there. I'm not sure where I land on this, so hopefully you'll be able to convince me of some points. I do know I have some people who live overseas in Italy and some of these other countries, and the complaints that I've heard about their healthcare system, i.e. just like the inefficiencies of it, and that like I saw somebody scheduled out a year from today's date for like a really life-threatening like x-ray that needed to be done. This is all TikTok. You know what I mean? This is just like people telling stories. It could be lies, it could be misinterpreted, made up, or whatever. But I guess, do you have any thoughts on the effectiveness or the efficiency of these like kind of more free healthcare systems or these cheaper healthcare systems?
Well, the American healthcare system is extremely inefficient. Medical professionals talk about this all the time. It's so inefficient because of the bureaucracy behind it, because of the insurance industry. For every one doctor, you have to have like 6 to 7 administrators because of how much paperwork they have to do, how much bureaucracy they have to go to do something, you know? Before they can do a surgery, a life-threatening surgery, they have to check with the insurance company to make sure that they can do it, you know? Because if they do the surgery and the insurance company doesn't cover it, then this person is in a lifetime of debt, you know? The American system is inefficient. The times we get booked out are crazy, and it's crazy in other countries too. And to me, it's just, well, invest more money in it for everybody needs to, you know. But specifically talking about America, it's insanely inefficient here, and it's insanely ineffective here.
Yeah, and I would agree with you that it's inefficient here, but I guess the argument would be that it is like unimaginably more inefficient in these other countries, and they blame it on these things. I mean, even take it on this like on an example that I'm sure you might be able to empathize with, but like you have a very serious issue that needs to be treated, and you have to be waiting in line for an issue of somebody who was like riding on a motorcycle naked and like trying to do wheelies, and then he fell and now his like leg is broken. You know what I mean? But you have like a life-altering issue that needs to be fixed, and you have to wait in line behind this guy. You know what I mean? That issues like that, and you could take it to a little bit more controversial issues, like people will talk about like obesity, and they'll say that that's like purposely caused, and so like why am I waiting behind people who are unhealthy or something, like willingly unhealthy? That's not an argument that I'd make, but this is the kind of ideology that you would have to be fighting against. They would say that it is inefficient because it's free for everybody. People who don't deserve health insurance quicker than me, this is kind of the argument, are getting it before me, something like that. I imagine you have some reactions to this, but how do you kind of unpack that?
I think that's just a silly take, to be honest. First of all, I don't know the exact facts behind this, but to me, there is no way that there is any hospital that takes priority over someone with a non-life-threatening thing versus someone with a life-threatening thing. If somebody comes in there that's about to die, the hospital's going to take care of them, you know? You can show me something where that's not true, and I'll change my opinion, but me knowing how the healthcare industry works, or how doctors and how hospitals work, that's how they do it.
That makes sense to me. Maybe the life-threatening issue wouldn't be, I guess, the best example, but maybe it's not life-threatening, but it seems as if you could maybe sort and order ailments, injuries by like how caused was it by the person, how responsible are they for it, how serious it is. And it might not even be life-threatening, but it might be like, I need to get this fixed so that I can operate life better.
Right.
And now I have to wait 6 months to do that. And that 6 months isn't life-threatening, but it's cost time. And the idea is that might be more under a system to where things aren't paid for. The doctors aren't as efficient as they are here. The administration isn't as quick as they're here. The medical care isn't as good. The research isn't as good. Stuff like that. Like those things need money and need funding, not as much as we're giving them now, but
Right.
the idea is free might not be able to cover it, or cheap might not be able to cover it.
Well, I think it does cover it. Like specifically here in America, our the effectiveness of our healthcare is pretty much at the bottom of any industrialized first world country, and it's the most privatized for-profit healthcare industry out of any country.
Is that true in regards to paying, or is that true in regards to how long you have to wait for surgery, or how good your surgery is done? Or like, I imagine there are certain statistics that you can look at that are like the botch rate. Like, how often does our medical thing like literally just mess up a surgery? How long does it take them to actually see you? How many times does somebody die when they're not supposed to? You know, stuff like that. Like, I wonder if our statistics are particularly worse than other countries, or the conservatives would argue that it's way better here. Like, all those numbers would be lower, but the costs would be higher. You might be waiting for, or filling out a bunch of paperwork, and the payment maybe takes a while or something like that for insurance to actually cover it, and then you get boned because it doesn't actually cover it.
Right.
Something like that. But I'm not sure if people are dying because of inefficiencies in the system more than you would expect from just any system ever. You might be able to correct me on that, but I don't know.
I don't know specifically about the number of people that are actually dying, but I know the amount of people that aren't getting the proper care is much higher because of the insurance bureaucracy that you have to go through. It's somebody needs a certain medicine, then the insurance company will not cover that until they try a few other things that cost less. You know, that happens a lot specifically with medicine for women. Actually, it's a much higher rate of women that get improper care due to the insurance. But the insurance makes you go through all of these different steps to make sure that you really do need this. And that's really the biggest problem is the bureaucracy of it. Doctors have to wait and wait. Like, a doctor knows you need this surgery. They know you need this surgery, but they can't give you the surgery until they try 50 other things before that. That's what the insurance industry does.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and I could see that being the case too. I could also see, now this depends on who necessarily is diagnosing. I could definitely see people self-diagnosing, saying that they need this kind of thing, but not needing that.
Well,
just
I mean,
being
it's not even the people that are
uneducated,
doing
you know?
that. It's the doctors. The doctors are
Yes,
saying you
that
need
is
this.
interesting to me.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's what is happening. You know, I don't have any specific stats or data to give you, but I have testimonials from doctors and stuff, and that's what's happening. Is the doctors have to wait to give proper care that they know that they need until the insurance company tells them that it's okay. My mom had to do that with surgery for her thumb a few months ago. She had to go through all of these different other procedures until they finally were allowing her to get surgery for her thumb. And then when the doctor went in there and did something else when they had her thumb open that the insurance didn't necessarily say she needed, she has to pay that out of pocket now. You know, it was a specific thumb surgery. The doctor was in there and said, "Oh, I need to fix this other thing while I'm in here." The insurance company didn't know about that. So all of a sudden my mom has to pay that out of pocket now. That's the downside of our health insurance industry.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to grasp some of these issues because you can foresee the exact opposite kind of having some issues too. Like I would say, I remember my buddy who lives in Italy had told me some story about him getting surgery on his back. He was having some really bad heart problems, and they just like beat him up like so bad during the surgery, and they ended up having to perform 2 surgeries, one because the first one was botched, and then they had to perform a second one on him because they had done it so poorly, and that was after he had waited for like way too long or something. This was all in his massive critique of this healthcare system or whatever, so take this all with a grain of salt or whatever it is. But the idea is that with more funding, they might be more effective, but it would cost us with something. Is this appealing to you at all, or?
I think with more funding, they would be effective. I think we need to put as much funding as we can into the healthcare industry.
Well, and then the funding would come from us as payers of insurance or paying the healthcare thing. I also think that particularly with insurance, we kind of have to dive into this idea of causing your own issues versus not. And so like a lot of conservatives will talk about this fairness issue of like somebody who doesn't have any problems and especially lives a healthy lifestyle as not needing insurance. Therefore, if we were to all pay a flat fee of insurance, it wouldn't necessarily be fair. What is your reaction?
I mean, I don't think we need to be all paying for insurance. You know, this should be a sort of taxed thing, like it is in most countries. We pay everybody pretty much pays a certain amount of money into insurance every month. You know, we have the money. We have the money to have free healthcare in terms of our taxes, in terms of what we already pay. You know, and it's not and. I think it's just completely inhumane to say, well, I'm healthier than this person, so I shouldn't have to pay for them to have health care. You know, I don't think that's how society works. I think society works by neighbors helping neighbors and people encouraging everybody to be healthy with each other.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense too, but the idea is that you're pointing to the neighbor who maybe caused their own ailment, and you're making a willing decision to be healthier. And then now you have to pay for somebody who knows better, who knows that they could be healthier if they had tried. And so that seems kind of unfair also. That seems kind of like it might be inhumane, but it's like if you very knowingly caused your own things, then I have to pay for that.
What would you very knowingly cause?
Like if you smoke all the time and you develop lung cancer. Like you know that smoking cigarettes causes lung cancer. Everybody tells you cigarettes cause lung cancer. You get lung cancer, I have to pay for your treatments.
Right.
That seems a little...
But, I mean, other people are paying for your treatments if you get lung cancer, too. That's how it works.
My percentage of getting lung cancer is significantly lower than yours because of the willing action that you might be doing to smoke. That would be the argument.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't think that's how society. I think it comes down to America's individualistic mindset of we don't really care what happens to other people. We care about what happens to us, type of thing. You know, I think in a society where we actually cared about our neighbors, then it would go farther as to encouraging our neighbors not to smoke. You know, encouraging our neighbors to get healthy, caring about them. You know, I think it's a simple-minded view to say, oh, he's smoking a lot, so he gets cancer. That's his fault, not mine. You know, I think society works a lot better when we converse with each other and encourage each other to be healthy as a society. You know, and the same thing goes for like obesity. You know, that's an example of that. Well, it's your fault that you ate so much. First of all, I'm not going to go into this, but the chemicals in the sugar, the artificial sweeteners that we put into our food is chemically addictive and is what causes America to have the highest obesity rate out of any country. Most of our stuff that we put in our food is banned in other countries because of those properties. So a lot of this stuff is like systemic issues, and it's not even like personal individual issues. How many people start smoking out of poverty and get addicted to it? You know, it's a much larger issue to just look and say, that person did that to themselves. It's not my fault. That's such a barbaric mindset, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting. This gets into an interesting conversation about like nature and nurture and like how much are you responsible for. I definitely lean towards giving people as much responsibility as I can, as that promotes growth. As in if it's somebody else's fault as to why I am the way I am, that limits what I can do to get better, to fix myself. There are obviously extremes with this and that places I wouldn't necessarily go. I wouldn't say that people now are so systemically pressed, especially in regards to like smoking, that you could make that kind of argument in terms of insurance. Like I could look broadly and say that people are smoking because of ads, because of people making addictive substances, because of people intentionally trying to get people hooked on cigarettes or something like that. That I can agree with, but when it comes to making people pay for that problem, when to me it's such an easy decision not to smoke, something I'm very blessed with.
Look at what they put in, like, look at the modern vape products. It's labeled for children. It's marketed to children. It has these fun and colorful flavors and tasty flavors for children to get appealed and addicted to. You know, it comes down to something much bigger than just someone picking up a cigarette or something and deciding to smoke. Most of it comes from people in poverty, you know? It's so much more systemic. And like I said, I think it is a little bit ridiculous to say that it is someone's fault for being who they are, and we need to take responsibility for who we are because we need to change ourselves and be better. I think that's a very American capitalistic mindset of we need to be better. We always are striving for greatness and to be better, and it's never okay to just be who we are now and to help each other out. It's a strive of competition against yourself. And I think that's a big reason to the mental health crisis that's happening all around the world, and specifically America today.
Really? I definitely fundamentally disagree with that notion. I do understand the dangers of it, like as in going far in one end could definitely lead to some sort of mental health thing, but change is impossible without the acceptance of some sort of responsibility. Even when we were encouraging people to work towards lowering their carbon emissions. You know what I mean? Like, that's us striving to be better.
Right.
We know where we
Right.
are. But you wouldn't say we should accept who we are. We emit. You know what I mean?
No,
You know
no.
what I mean? You'd want to be better.
Right.
That would be the same with all things.
I don't think it is the
all
same with
things.
all things.
Interesting.
I think it varies, you know, specifically. Like, there's such a big notion to be a better person and just keep striving to be better. And it's never enough. You're never going to be the better person. And to some extent, like, there's some things that's better at, you know, like I could be better at someone that doesn't shower every day. You know, they can be better at showering every day, you know. But there's also things, it's more ideological things that people strive to be better at every single day. I strive to be a better student, you know. I strive to be a better worker. That type of stuff where it's you're not gaining from you being better. Other people are gaining from you being better. I think that's where the distinction is made.
I think that gets a little fundamental. I would say you would gain from being a better worker or a better student. You could literally gain monetarily, but there's also this argument that, like, by being a better worker, you become more comfortable working. You're going to be working, you should be more comfortable doing that. Something like that. But in general, I think pushing yourself is good. I also think that because one of the things they don't tell you about this kind of like grind set, this kind of like pushing forward, is that you are enjoying the spoils of the past version of you who pushed you to where you are today. So it's like you get to enjoy who you are today because a past version of you wanted to be better, and now you get to enjoy that. So that's also part of growing, is appreciating the past growths before you. And so you do get to enjoy the spoils of your work. The resting moment is right now, and you also get to push forward. It seems circular,
yeah,
but...
no, I understand where you come from, and you're not wrong at all. What I'm trying to say is that it is a systemic thing that is pushed into us to constantly be working harder, because when we work harder, we provide more labor for the people that profit off of it. And that comes down to, and the whole grind set thing is something that just gets instilled with us in our daily lives. As something that we need to do, but it's something that we don't benefit as much as the people that profit off of our labor do. That's what I'm talking about more specifically. Like, obviously, all of us, you know, it's good to do 10 more push-ups a day. You know, it's good to go run a little bit more every day, be like a healthier person. That's not the issue I'm talking about. The issue I'm talking about is the work harder, be better, so you can be a better cog in the system type of thing. On an individual level, it's not a bad thing, you know, when you try to do something better for the betterment of yourself. Like, I try to read more, you know, and I see, so I know I learn and I grow more, and it's great. I'm a much better person because of it, you know. But if I'm forced to read more so I can provide that information, retail it back to some company that's profiting off of it, that's where the distinction is.
Yeah, well, and that makes sense too. I guess this comes on the presupposition that you're dealt the cards that you are dealt, as in you have to work. Mm-hmm. You have to make money to live in society. That's just how it's structured. I do think that in an ideal society, very loaded, you're working, doing kind of what you want to be doing. Mm-hmm. Even now, you're funding your life and you can be on this podcast, and you can spread the word that you want to be spreading. You can talk to people, you can do all these things, and you're paying for that. And so that you're doing what you love and you're working to do what you love. And the idea is that hopefully work is something that you also somewhat enjoy. I know I'm pursuing a job that I am going to really enjoy. I hope so. That I'm going to enjoy doing. You know what I mean? And so theoretically, it would feel less like work than maybe what you're describing it as.
I mean, that's great, but that also comes from a point of privilege. We're here at a university. We go to college. We are privileged because of that. You know, people that are much less fortunate, being of the cards that they were dealt, end up being put into situations that don't make them happy, and there's not a lot that they can do about it.
Yeah, this is interesting. I guess this comes from, there's a perspective that everybody could get themselves out of these situations, or that you're choosing to go to college. You know what I mean? Something along those lines is the idea then that like the hands that you were dealt could have been so oppressive that.
Well, how many people can afford to go to college? You know, there's not a lot.
Everyone can take out loans. I've always wondered how this works when they say that you can't afford college. I'm in a particular situation, but like you can always take out loans, correct? And then you can afford it hopefully over your lifetime. Like you're going to be making the money back. The college degree is going to be
First of all, most people won't make that money back. We don't get paid enough to make that money back, and people get put in struggles on a weekly basis that they don't have enough money to put in.
I'm not sure if statistically that's.
But if I go more into it, it's my bad.
No, that's okay.
I lost my train of thought there.
No, you're talking about people can't make that money back.
I mean, like, and to go to college takes so much time out of someone's day. Like, these people have to work to live. It's how hard is it to work to live? First of all, most people can't get by with one job anymore. Most people in America, I don't know what the exact statistic, I think it's 40% of Americans actually have to work multiple jobs in order to get by. How are you supposed to work 40 hours a week and pay for your college? To get student loans, you have to have a certain amount of credits, and you have to maintain a certain GPA. So to maintain those amount of credits, maintain that GPA, and go to school full time, not to mention a lot of these people in poverty have a lot more responsibilities when it comes to raising kids or helping out some part of their family that needs help. It's completely ridiculous to say that everybody can do it because you can just get loans.
Well, I do think that the idea of a loan, especially subsidized loans, is that you don't start paying for them until after college and then they're broken out. The idea is that you end up paying a lot more for that college because you had to put it out. But I think especially versus high school educated versus college educated, college educated people make way more money than uncollege educated people. I think that's like statistically true. I'd have to look at the exact numbers, but it's like leaps and bounds ahead. Like the average person who went to college makes way more than the person who didn't. That doesn't necessarily mean that they got it. They made that money because of the degree or all these other things. There might be a chicken or the egg thing, something like that. But I do think people pay it back. And there are also solutions to, you can take out loans to live, like living in a dorm, living in on-campus apartments, stuff like that. There's this really interesting, like, right-wing talking point where they say that, like, 98% of people who graduated high school and got married before having kids are above the poverty line, something like that. And so it tries to put that into a perspective where it's very easy to follow these specific things and you are instantly further away from poverty. I'm assuming your argument would be that you have the privilege to make those decisions.
Right, you have the privilege to make those decisions, and you have the privilege to finish high school.
Right.
Like a lot of these poverty areas in poverty have an extreme high college or high school dropout rate due to systemic and external factors that aren't just due to that kid wanted to drop out of high school. You know, that's such a base level thinking and not looking at like actual factors that are going into these kids' daily lives.
Yeah. I do wonder, and I think this might be a little doomsday, I wonder if without those systemic oppressions, if there would still be a group of people who wouldn't finish high school, who wouldn't do these things.
I mean, maybe.
I think that there would be. I think that there are some people who are just like that, unrelated to systemic factors. I think there are a ton more because of systemic factors, but I do think there is a human aptitude that sometimes people just don't want to do things. I'm not saying that accounts for even the majority of people who are currently in this situation, but I do think that is worth noting that definitely some people are choosing to be where they're at, as in like offered alternatives.
I don't think
know if they
anybody
would do the
chooses
work.
to be like dirt poor, and I don't know about that, but regardless, I think it's silly to speculate on what would happen, you know, when instead of just addressing the situation that's actually at hand.
Well, the problem is you can't necessarily. This is where it gets into that fairness thing. It's hard to address the situation at hand when there's a potential that people are choosing to be in the situations that they're in. First, we have to prove that that's not the case, that it is the case or that it isn't, because then you get into this fairness thing of like, why am I paying for your lung cancer? You know what I mean? When you chose to smoke, because you can even take out the people who are maybe systemically biased to start smoking. You take out those people, and then it's like you're in college, you're educated. Right now, I don't think are facing any systemic oppression to start smoking cigarettes. If you started smoking, I shouldn't have to pay for your lung cancer. Would you agree with that?
I think that's a simplistic way of looking at how the actual
I'm not.
system
Yeah,
would
I'm not
work.
saying that this even represents the system.
Right.
So would you agree with that? I'm not saying it represents the system, because the next step would be what percentage of people being paid for by the system fall into that category. That would be the next step.
Right.
And you could say it's a really low percentage.
You're not paying for me to get my cancer treated. You know,
If
you're paying into the system that treats everybody. You know, you're not giving me money to pay for my cancer treatment.
If it were to be a free system and all of our taxes were to be increased, I technically would be paying. It would be a millionth of a penny,
Right.
you know, or whatever. But I would be paying for yours because you wouldn't be the only one, and this wouldn't be the only issue that is caused by
Right.
intentional decision making.
Right.
There are other. You basically get every drug user again who fits into the category of educated person who decides to do drugs. So maybe you'd have to include every single drug that isn't systemically put onto somebody. All those people are being improperly paid for, unfairly paid for. Then you would have to get into this kind of like weird issue of all the other things, like maybe you have people who just really want to motorcycle shirtless, you know what I mean, or all these other things. You have to include them, all of the dangerous actions. Then you get into the really nuanced topic of like people who are overweight, like how comorbid is obesity with a bunch of other issues. Then you get into you get into these really interesting things about like mental health, like how much of mental health is caused by you, how much of it is caused by society. That's where the conversation gets a little bit more nuanced than saying it might be silly to include those people in there. That's why I'm saying that that's the whole Republican argument is
Right.
somewhere in this vein of
I mean, do you think that your tax dollars should be going to bombing the Middle East overseas?
yes, and this is I'm not saying yes, I think that. I'm saying yes, this is like another step of this argument. This is the argument for universal anything. Of like
Right.
us paying for anything as you talk about those things.
I mean, I guess you could have a system where nobody pays taxes at all, and it's a completely individualistic nation, and everybody looks at each other with some sort of scrutiny and fear, and that's not a society I believe anybody actually wants to live in. But you get into a society. We have the money. We're currently paying. Most of our money is going into our military complex and is causing wars overseas. That's where most of it is going. We have the money. We pay insurance every month. We have the money. The thing is, it's just like, sure, you might think it's unfair that you have to pay $1 a year for somebody else to get lung cancer treatment or something like that. But this creates a society where people are comfortable with each other, you know? People have a much better connection with each other because it's a system where we help each other out, you know? We do things for each other. I don't think anybody actually wants to live in the society where we all just take care of ourselves and none of our money goes into helping each other, and it's take care of yourself or die. I think that's barbaric.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a really good point too, because on the other end of the coin, you have the $1 that you're paying to people who don't deserve it, but then you have the other $99 a month that are getting paid to people who do,
Right.
even you would agree. And even if it were half of people don't deserve your money and half of people do, you begin to question like, did I choose to be a person who deserved? You know, did I choose to be in the good group and not the bad group?
Right.
I don't know.
And
maybe.
I think it also comes down to a bigger issue is we should all be making more money to the point where it shouldn't matter that much, you know? It shouldn't matter. It's such a little part of our money that goes into helping the whole industry, helping each other out as a society. The money we have now is going to something that nobody agrees with. You know, it's pretty much bipartisan at this point that we don't want our money to be sent to Israel. A lot of people, like, no party is really like on favor of that at this point. And why can't we keep that money here? You know, why do we have to keep bolstering our military to the point where we have to make these decisions? It shouldn't even have to be a decision that we have to make, you know? We should be making more money. The corporations should be profiting off of our labor less, and we should be spending less money for us to be this militaristic state. And then it wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, I do think that can get just a little bit weaponized depending on what the conflict is. Like, I guess, like, how do you feel about us sending money to, like, Ukraine?
Mm-hmm. How do I feel personally?
Yeah.
I think that's a little.
I'm not
bit
saying
tricky.
they're comparable, but like
Right.
the idea is that like military is good because if we're going to be the arbiter of like atrocities, we should be able to do that, right? Now we have to be a successful arbiter, but like
it's the extent at the money that we're spending. You know, we spend more money than the next. I think it's 6 countries combined. You know, like we're spending more money than China and Russia and the next 4 countries combined on our military. Do we really need that to do what we're currently doing? No.
Yeah, I'd have to look. I am not a militaristic person in general, but I also just don't know what's going on. I could see the argument though, like I'd like to think that, and this might be a little bit controversial, I'd like to think that we're one of the best countries in the world at something, whether it be whatever. And this might be in some moral category, as in like the world kind of sucks, but we're working with it the best we can, something along those lines.
Well, I disagree with that entirely.
No, I know, I figured you would, but if that were to be the case, we would want to put, let's say there is a country, like pick your favorite country, you'd want them to be the moral arbiter of the world. You know what I mean?
I
Because
want
they
the people
do it
to
well.
be the moral arbiter of the world.
Well, the people chose this, like America.
People didn't.
I would say, what percentage of people do you think are patriotic here?
I don't think. I think if you look at specifically like presidential elections in the past 20 years or so, it's everybody says we're voting between the lesser of 2 evils. You know, who chooses that? You know,
Yeah.
we don't even choose our presidential candidates. We elect representatives that elect them. You know, we don't do a direct thing for that. It's and to go back with like the whole moral thing, it's we are sending an insane amount of money to Israel. They have free healthcare there. You know, we're paying for them.
We're basically doing for them what you want to be done to us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what we're doing. We're paying for these other nations and we're paying to colonize other nations so we can take their resources. You know, we're not the moral arbiter of the world at all. You know, Noam Chomsky talked about this all the time. We're the biggest terrorist state in the world. The amount of crimes the U.S. has committed is far greater than any other. The amount of countries that we've had a say in their elections is far greater than any other country in the world. I mean, you can watch any single Noam Chomsky lecture and he'll talk about this extensively.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if I'd say that we're the moral arbiter. By that I meant like we try to, influence the world. And I think we are the most influential country in the world. So whether we are good or bad or want to be or
that's
not,
why we
do arbiter the world.
That's why, is because we have the biggest military. You know,
which I think would be good if we were a good country. Would be the idea.
I think if we were a good country, we wouldn't have to have that. If we were a good country, then why would we feel the need to bolster up this defense system, to bolster up this military for oppression?
You would hope that would be the case, but I don't know if human nature lends itself. Like, how do you feel about China, like as a country, like morally?
What do you? I mean, like
their
specific
leadership, or like I guess the accusations of like labor camps, torture camps.
I'm not familiar enough with
any of these. If there were places like this that existed, you can even take like every conversation always goes back to the Nazis, but
right.
You can take Germany. Like, you would be thankful that there was a moral arbiter to diminish that, right?
Sure.
The idea is that like that's what we would want to be for other countries in the world. Is the whole idea.
Sure.
That's why we would put a bunch of money into the military. And you can hope that we wouldn't need to do that, but the idea is that the world could always present itself as needing that. You know what I mean? There are always evil people. There are always, and sometimes those evil people get together and they live in the same place.
I mean,
we got to take care of it.
When we did that though, when we were fighting in World War II, we didn't have that extreme gap in the military spending. You know, when we did exactly what you were describing, we didn't have to have more than the next 6 countries combined. So
the idea is that we learned. You know what I mean? Like we learned that we needed to, and so now, hopefully, nothing like that can happen again. Obviously, you can point to Israel-Palestine. You can point to Russia invading Ukraine.
Right, it is happening.
Yeah, it's not being successful, but I guess you could maybe speculate as what the world would be like without this presence. Or you can just say that now that we've built the militaristic presence, we're just open for corruption, and now we're going to be the moral arbiter, but in a bad way. You know, like we're like literally wrecking havoc against the world. Which
there you go.
That makes sense to me. But I don't know if we should stop funding it. We should become a better country would be the idea.
I don't think we should stop funding it. I think we should stop funding it how much we are. We don't need to have this much money. We can take like such a small portion out of it and have free healthcare. Like that's the thing, is we have that money.
Yeah, well, and if you talk to anybody who's in the military, they also are very aware of how
wasteful.
Oh yeah,
so
like
wasteful.
Just inefficient our military budget spending is.
Yeah,
like,
how much?
Because there's so much regulations, it has to be like offloaded to specific companies, and they overcharge by like 100% for a bolt.
That's why we're doing what we're doing. And so Raytheon and Lockheed Martin can keep profiting. You know, they're the ones that are paying our lawmakers, and they're the ones that profit off of every single war that we have. You know, to me, war isn't something that happens. It's a scheduled thing that is there for a purpose to make profit, you know, because, I mean, my stance on that comes back to statistical facts of what has happened in the past. Every time we have a war, every single time, it's insane amount of profits from Lockheed Martin, insane amount from Raytheon, and it goes into the pockets of the politicians.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense, too, although again, my foreign affairs is not the best. I'm a philosopher, so everything is just so broad. It's like these are the two arguments, figure it out. You know what I mean? So none of my arguments I feel like are very strong. They're just like this is what they'd say, right? But I do think like take the Russia-Ukraine thing happening. To me, that just seems just straight up evil. Like it just seems like colonization that we were supposed to have moved on from hundreds of years ago or something like that. You know? I mean, something that all of us attest.
But you have to look at like the why. Why did Russia invade Ukraine? You know, a big part of it has to do with their oil and natural gas reserves that they have. I think that's why Russia really wants Ukraine. That's why America really wants Ukraine. That's why America really wants Greenland. You have to look at why are they invading, you know? I don't think we've had a why out of pure hatred and colonization since Germany, but even that was like a campaign so they could have financial dominance over the world. Yeah.
Well, and that makes sense too, but I guess the idea is that it's happening and a military budget is good. Like we should be funding that. You know what I mean? Like even if it's a system that we created, it's kind of the same thing like even if you did smoke, we should be funding it. They're our neighbors. You know what I mean? And so we should be funding that. It would be the idea, is like in the same way that you want us to fund.
Like I said, I entirely agree that we should. We should be helping them.
Maybe even as much as we are.
Right.
But your problem is that you don't, I don't think you like where the funding is going.
I mean, well, part of that with Israel, I hate the funding going to Israel, but it's, we're putting so much money into this, you know, and not all of it is going to Ukraine, not all of it is going to Israel. A lot of it is going to our military production, and a lot of it's going to our inefficient actions in the military. You know, it's like I said, we can keep the military funding. We can even have the highest military funding by far in the world. We don't need to have exactly how much we have now, though. We can take some of that out and pay for healthcare. And still be the top producer.
Yeah. See, this is what we were talking about earlier with like a monetary medium. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You know what I mean? So yeah, and I think that's a good sentiment. I do think that weighing it on particular wars gets a little fuzzy. Like it's hard when you use like an example because again, like you would want to fund a war. Now, I will say some wars are so egregious and need so much funding that I'm kind of thankful that we're at the funding that we have right now. As in, like, if I really hated the Russia-Ukraine war, I would be very thankful that we're overcharging our military as much as we are.
Like I said,
so
we
that
could still be doing that, though. We could
Yeah.
still be doing that. And I think you have to look at, like, why the wars are happening. You know, you have to. For instance, Israel's war is a straight up genocide that we're funding. You know, it's not me saying that. It's hundreds of scholarly articles that have been saying that it is. So do we need to be funding that as much as we're funding Ukraine for defense of an invasion? Like, there are different reasons as to why. It's not just a straight, we are the moral arbitrators of the world and we need to fund everybody who's like on our side. We have to look at why. We need to look at what's actually happening and not just the ideologies of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's really important too. We've been going on for about an hour and a half now, so I thought this has been really awesome, and I feel like we've really fleshed out like the argument, the discussion, and I think that that's been really, really fun too. So, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to kind of close us out. Really, if you want to summarize a lot of the stuff that you've said, or any of the thoughts that you have, or if there are lasting impressions or thoughts you want to leave with the viewers who have gone this far, and especially if you have any plugging, you want to talk about the club, if you want to talk about things that people should read, look at, whatever. This is really your opportunity to close us out.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get much to talk about the false dichotomy of our American system, which is Democrat and Republican alike are both there to uphold the capitalist powers at hand. You know, they work hand in hand to oppress the working class. So, like I said, that's a big part of our organization. Is we're not Democrat, we're not Republican. We fight for the people. We fight for liberation and freedom for all. You know, that's our whole goal as Students Resisting Fascism. So, I mean, I guess to close out, it is serious what's happening today. You know, people really don't want to take they want to take as little of a stance possible, so they don't have to address the harsh reality of what's happening. But the harsh reality is we are a fascist country. Specifically, we're an inverted fascist country where the corporations have complete control over the government and lawmakers. And that's where the issue comes. It is the corporations, it's the billionaires that are oppressing the working class. And that's what we're here to fight about. All of the environmental issues, all of these other issues, all come down to the corporations funding our lawmakers to have their way. So I think it's really important that people get organized, because it's not going to happen unless the people take a stance for power for the people. You know, we based our organization off the Black Panthers. That's really who we strive to be. That's who we look up to. And so we're trying to create an organization like that. Specifically here in Ames now, we're trying to create some food security shelters and programs, like a free breakfast program over the summer, some food shelters where people can come in and take what they need, stuff like that, because I think that's a big way to build solidarity within the community and unite the people. So I guess you could follow us on Instagram at communities_resisting_fascism. We also have a TikTok where I post a little bit about current events and executive orders that are happening and why people need to pay attention. But I mean, the situation's dire. The climate change situation is dire. The current administration is dire. And we as the people, if we want any sort of freedom, have to take a stance now and be political now, no matter who we are.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on. I thought this was super awesome. And then I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.